The first time it happened, I convinced myself it meant nothing. Morning light revealed deep tire tracks slicing through my garden, flattening roses I had nurtured for years. Those flowers were not decoration. They marked seasons of rebuilding after divorce, quiet evenings, steady habits that kept me grounded. I repaired the soil, replaced stems, and chose calm over anger. At my age, you learn accidents exist. You also learn not every wound deserves immediate confrontation. A week later, it happened again. The tracks returned, wider, slower, pressed deliberately as if the driver wanted them noticed. That shift changed everything. Speed suggests carelessness. Slowness suggests intention. Standing there, I felt something colder than anger settle in. This was not about a shortcut. It was about someone testing how much of my life could be crossed without consequence. What disturbed me most was not the destruction itself, but the attitude behind it. Whoever did this felt secure, unhurried, almost comfortable leaving evidence behind. That kind of confidence does not belong to strangers. It belongs to people who believe permission has already been granted. As I studied the angle of the tracks and where they entered, recognition arrived quietly. I knew the vehicle. I knew the timing. I knew exactly whose confidence this was. I stood there longer than necessary, letting the realization settle. At this stage of life, you recognize patterns faster than emotions. This was not random hostility. It was symbolic. A statement delivered through mud and crushed petals. Someone was announcing dominance without words, assuming I would tolerate it as I had tolerated other losses. That assumption was the real insult. It suggested my quiet rebuilding had been mistaken for surrender. I did not react that day. I cleaned the damage again, but this time with awareness. Respect is a boundary many people only notice once it is enforced. I understood then this moment would define what followed. Not through shouting or confrontation, but through clarity. The garden was only the opening move. What crossed the line was not rubber on soil, but the belief that my life remained open terrain. That belief was about to meet resistance. I sensed this was no longer about flowers, but about dignity, memory, and the quiet boundaries men my age draw after learning how easily others attempt to erase them when silence has been mistaken repeatedly for permission and patience misunderstood as weakness. I finally saw him one morning as the sun lifted over the fence line. My ex-wife's new husband sat behind the wheel, posture relaxed, gaze fixed forward. He had not slowed down. He did not look toward the house or the garden. He crossed the land as if it had been included in the marriage contract, tires pressing confidence into the soil. Seeing him in motion clarified what damage alone could not. This was not a mistake repeated out of carelessness. It was a routine executed without hesitation. His silence was intentional. By refusing acknowledgement, he declared something louder than words. He believed presence alone granted authority, and that belief was carried with every pass. At this stage of life, restraint comes from experience, not fear. I did not confront him because confrontation rewards men who seek reaction. Instead, I watched. I noted the mornings he chose, the angle he entered, the speed he increased once damage was done. Patterns reveal motives when faces remain blank. Each pass carried a message meant for me alone. He was announcing rank, territory, entitlement. Marriage to my past gave him imagined rights over my present. That realization did not provoke anger. It produced clarity. He was not competing with me. He was erasing me in increments, assuming I would accept it quietly. Men over 40 understand when a line has shifted. Disrespect rarely begins loudly. It arrives disguised as normal behavior, repeated until resistance feels inconvenient. I recognized the tactic because I had seen it before in boardrooms and breakups alike. Control often starts with small trespasses left unanswered. That morning ended without words exchanged, yet something permanent settled between us. He drove on, convinced nothing stood in his way. I remained certain something now did. Observation had replaced uncertainty. The situation was no longer personal irritation. It had become a question of boundaries, and I was already preparing the answer. I understood then that silence would be misread if allowed to continue. Respect requires response, measured but firm. This was the moment where patience must evolve into action. He believed ownership was proven by repetition. I knew ownership was defended through resolve. The next steps would be quiet, deliberate, and unavoidable. What began as a drive through soil was now a test of character, one that demanded attention before tolerance hardened into permanent loss for everyone involved moving forward without excuses. When people heard what was happening, the first question came fast. Why didn't you call the police? At my age, experience teaches that not every conflict begins as a crime. Some begin as a message. Involving authorities too early can transform a quiet boundary issue into theater, and I refused to play a role written by someone else. He wanted reaction, noise, escalation. I wanted understanding. Law enforcement solves clear violations, not slow intimidation designed to provoke impatience and mistakes from men who rush. That lesson had been earned through years of watching impulsive decisions collapse in real time repeatedly. Instead, I documented everything with precision. I photographed tracks before rain erased them. I measured distance from fence to damage. I noted time of day and direction of entry. Each detail mattered. Documentation is not obsession. It is preparation. With every record, emotion loosened its grip. Facts replaced assumptions. Memory became evidence. I understood that proof carries weight long after anger fades. If confrontation came, it would not be fueled by frustration, but supported by clarity gathered calmly and consistently over days. This approach protected me from missteps he might later exploit through silence, patience, and deliberate restraint always intact. Over the years, I learned that people who erase slowly rely on disbelief. They expect you to doubt yourself, minimize harm, or act too soon. I refused all three. By staying quiet, I removed his advantage. By collecting proof, I shifted time in my favor. Intimidation weakens when it meets structure. Every image and note reminded me this was not personal emotion, but measurable behavior. That distinction matters deeply to men who value accountability over theatrics. Without structure, conflict becomes noise that benefits the loudest participant and leaves quieter truths buried beneath impulse and regret later on reflection cycles alone. Choosing patience was not weakness. It was strategy shaped by experience. I knew eventually the pattern would expose itself fully. When it did, my response would be undeniable. Not emotional, not reactive, but firm. Men my age understand timing determines outcome. I was not avoiding action. I was preparing the ground beneath it. Proof does not rush. It accumulates. And when presented, it ends debates before they begin. This moment demanded discipline, foresight, and respect for consequences beyond immediate satisfaction earned through decades of mistakes, recoveries, restraint, and hard lessons learned quietly while others rushed ahead blindly and lost control. I did not make the call in anger, but in clarity built over days of restraint. Silence had already delivered its message, and prolonging it would change nothing. When she answered, her voice carried ease, not concern, as if my world no longer required acknowledgement. That tone reminded me how familiarity fades once separation redefines responsibility and empathy quietly expires between former partners. I sensed this discussion would reopen unresolved dynamics I had hoped maturity would dissolve over time alone. I explained carefully what was happening, describing the tracks, the timing, and the repetition. She responded with a sigh heavy with dismissal rather than surprise. That sound carried judgment wrapped in inconvenience. She did not ask questions or seek details. Instead, she suggested I was exaggerating sensitivity, confusing inconvenience with harm, which confirmed she had already chosen comfort over fairness. In that moment, I realized conversation itself had become a negotiation of my worth to her new life now settled. I paused, listening to the silence that followed her words. No apology arrived, no concern, no curiosity. Only a suggestion that I adjust my expectations. That pause carried more truth than any argument. It revealed how easily people detach once emotional investment shifts elsewhere leaving prior commitments reframed as inconvenience rather than shared history deserving respect. This realization altered the nature of the conflict permanently for me and removed any lingering doubt about intentions behind behavior. That morning call alone. That call clarified this was never about flowers or property alone. It was about how quickly value is withdrawn when relationships end. What once mattered becomes negotiable. Care becomes optional. Boundaries blur until challenged. I understood, then respect does not survive nostalgia. It requires present action. Without it, history is easily dismissed as irrelevant sentiment. That understanding marked the shift from tolerance to deliberate response and framed every decision that followed carefully without emotion clouding judgment or weakening resolve again. I ended the call calmly, knowing it changed nothing outwardly, yet altered everything internally. Some conversations arrive too late to repair connection, but arrive on time to reveal truth. I no longer needed agreement or validation. I needed clarity. This exchange provided it fully. From that moment, the issue stopped being personal and became procedural, inevitable, and quietly final. That realization set the stage for decisive action without drama or regret, guided by experience rather than impulse earned over years. I asked her one question and waited. Would you ask him to stop? The silence that followed stretched longer than expected, heavy and intentional. In that pause, I felt the weight of years condense into seconds. This was no longer about mediation or fairness. It was about allegiance. I realized answers are often revealed not by words, but by the time someone takes before choosing where they stand when pressure arrives quietly, without raising voices or threats at all today. Her response arrived measured and composed. She said she would not intervene and offered reasons that sounded reasonable until examined closely. She spoke of practicality of schedules and inconvenience as if those outweighed respect. Listening to her, I understood choice had been made long before my call. She was not unable to act. She simply preferred the comfort of her present over the accountability of her past life built without me, included consideration or courtesy for shared history anymore now. That realization cut deeper than anger ever could. It reframed the entire conflict instantly. I was no longer speaking to a partner in resolution, but to a witness who had chosen distance. Adults understand this pivot well. It is the moment illusion falls away. You stop negotiating fairness and start acknowledging reality. From then on, expectations die and strategy replaces hope because clarity demands adjustment, not sentiment or nostalgia rooted in memories that no longer guide present behavior or choices. I ended the call without argument. There was nothing left to persuade. Her refusal did not shock me, but it settled something unresolved inside. The divorce papers had ended a marriage, but this ended obligation. I saw clearly where loyalty lived now, and it was not neutral. That knowledge stripped emotion from the situation. What remained was a clean understanding that respect would not be requested again. It would be enforced through calm, decisive steps, taken deliberately from that point. That moment mattered more than any legal decree. It marked the true separation. Some people leave relationships yet retain empathy. Others abandon empathy first. What I learned then stayed with me. When someone chooses convenience over dignity, they reveal character plainly. For men over 40, this lesson arrives quietly but permanently. From that point forward, I acted accordingly with restraint, preparation, and certainty, knowing humanity, once withdrawn, rarely returns unchanged despite time, apologies, or circumstances that later appear convincing again. The morning after the call arrived heavy with expectation. I stood by the window longer than usual, sensing movement before sound confirmed it. His vehicle entered the garden again, slower than before, deliberate in pace and direction. He steered closer to the house, narrowing the distance intentionally as if proximity itself were a message. This was no accident or habit. It was communication delivered through tires and silence. He wanted acknowledgement of dominance, proof that my words had reached him and been dismissed without hesitation or doubt. That clarity settled quickly and removed any lingering uncertainty about intent entirely now. I did not step outside or signal reaction. Experience teaches escalation feeds on visibility. Instead, I watched carefully, noting the line he crossed and the moment his speed increased as he exited. That detail mattered. It transformed irritation into evidence. By choosing to repeat the act after my conversation, he shifted responsibility fully onto himself. He was no longer ignorant or careless. He was informed and persistent. That distinction carries weight, especially when patterns meet records and intent becomes impossible to deny. This was the turning point I had been waiting for, quietly, with patience intact always and resolve firm. What he wanted was reaction, perhaps anger, confrontation, noise. He believed pressure would force me outward into conflict. Instead, his action narrowed my options into one clear path. The situation matured instantly from personal irritation into structured dispute. I organized my documentation with new focus, labeling dates, images, and measurements already collected. Each repetition strengthened the timeline. Each pass confirmed intent. This was no longer about feelings. It was about conduct, behavior, and consequence aligned by sequence rather than emotion. That shift removed doubt and replaced it with calm determination, shaped by years of experience and restraint earned slowly over. Standing there after he disappeared down the road, I felt no rush of adrenaline. What settled instead was certainty. By acting again after the call, he had answered every unspoken question. He believed intimidation would end the matter. He did not understand that repetition after notice changes everything. Nuisance becomes liability. Pattern becomes proof. From that moment forward, the outcome was no longer negotiable. The next steps would be quiet, methodical, and final, shaped by law, timing, and the patience he underestimated. Men learn late that restraint often carries the sharpest edge when backed by preparation and discipline alone. Now, I chose silence again, but this time it carried intention, not restraint. I did not knock on doors or raise my voice across fences. I prepared a registered letter addressed formally, without emotion. Inside it, I placed photographs, dates, measurements, and maps drawn with precision. Property lines were highlighted, boundaries unmistakable. This was not a threat. It was a record. It stated facts, history, and sequence calmly. Years teach that authority responds to clarity, not volume. The letter represented structure entering a space arrogance believed unguarded. I mailed it knowing paper often travels further than confrontation ever could alone thereafter. I did not wait for reaction because reaction was irrelevant. The purpose was interruption, not dialogue. By documenting intent, I shifted the narrative from personal dispute to formal accountability. Within days, confirmation arrived. The letter had been received. That receipt mattered more than any reply. It established awareness. From that moment, repetition would carry consequence automatically. Men who rely on intimidation rarely anticipate paperwork. They underestimate how systems respond when facts are orderly. I felt no triumph, only steadiness. This was not revenge. It was correction delivered through process rather than personality or pride alone, measured, controlled, final, and lawful. The following week passed quietly. No engine crossed the soil. No dust rose near the windows. Silence returned, heavier than before, yet different in texture. It was not avoidance. It was compliance. That absence confirmed the message had landed. Structure had replaced bravado. I continued, tending the garden, repairing damage, slowly restoring order leaf by leaf. Each untouched morning reinforced that boundaries once defined rarely need repetition. There was satisfaction, but it was subdued, mature, and internal. Victory at this age feels like relief rather than celebration, earned quietly, without witnesses' applause or noise whatsoever anymore. Now today, finally resolved. He never called. She never followed up. That silence spoke volumes. It signaled recognition of limits finally understood. Arrogance rarely apologizes. It simply withdraws when challenged properly. I did not need acknowledgement to feel resolved. Respect returned through absence, not words. Power later in life lies in knowing when action ends conflict permanently. This move closed the chapter without spectacle. What remained was peace shaped by discipline. When structure enters a space, chaos exits quietly. The garden stayed intact, and so did my sense of self, rebuilt, guarded, grounded, secure, calm, deliberate, lasting again, forever forward, stronger, wiser, alone inside. I replanted the garden slowly with deliberate care. Each stem returned to the soil by my own hands, not because loss demanded repair, but because order deserved restoration. Gardening after conflict teaches patience better than argument ever could. The rhythm of soil and water steadied my thoughts. What had been disrupted was not beauty alone, but routine and self-respect. Replanting became a quiet statement that control had returned. Nothing hurried me. Nothing provoked me. At this stage of life, rebuilding calmly carries more meaning than preserving what was damaged through resentment or haste learned over years lived fully alone. Age teaches how easily calm is misread. Some mistake silence for fear and distance for permission. I once made that mistake myself earlier in life. Now I understand calm is often chosen by those who see further ahead. True strength does not announce itself loudly. It waits until action is unavoidable, then moves precisely. The garden became proof of that lesson. Boundaries, once enforced properly, do not require constant defense. They hold because they are clear. That understanding stays with you long after the conflict ends and the noise fades, leaving perspective intact, steady, mature, grounded, reflective, enduring, always present. This experience was never about winning against another person. It was about recognizing when dignity requires response rather than endurance. I did not need apologies or validation to move forward. What mattered was restoring balance within my own space. Men over 40 learned that peace is earned through decisions, not reactions. You choose when to engage and when to conclude. The garden reflected that truth daily. It reminded me that boundaries protect growth. Without them, even the healthiest ground becomes vulnerable to erosion and quiet disrespect over time when left unchallenged repeatedly, without clarity or structure present consistently enough always. Today, the garden rests undisturbed. No tracks cross it and no engines intrude. That quiet is not accidental. It is maintained through awareness and resolve. I do not see this chapter as conflict resolved, but as a lesson integrated. Life after 40 rewards those who respond thoughtfully and finish decisively. When someone disrespects what you build, the answer is not rage. It is firmness guided by patience. The garden stands as proof that dignity defended quietly lasts longer than any argument ever could, while teaching restraint, wisdom, balance, clarity, self, respect, endurance, humility, growth, maturity, perspective, responsibility, always earned slowly.